Refugee Camp Part 2 in Zombies Past CLOCKTIME2. Extended version. This story is fictional and has no relation to real events or existing people. Any resemblance to reality is just a coincidence. Love, bitches, zombies, drugs, and science fiction. Unconsciousness, voracity, and brutality define predators, corrupts, zombies. In the refugee camp, my tasks consisted of social work, assistance in case of immediate needs, and daily data reporting, in coordination with the sisters of the healthcare and the posts of the security guards. The first thing I noticed were the various degrees of child malnutrition, and the messy business of guards and assistants behind tents and sanitary facilities. When I consulted Lillian about what I saw and the situations I had perceived, she replied that I was a beginner, and that I would already get used to the behavior of some of those people who used to fulfill those roles inevitably. I would have liked to correct such things, but I knew well and had firm instructions not to interfere in the facts of the past. Everything he saw belonged to the past and should remain as it was originally, thing of the past. Before finishing my short voluntary shift of less than 4 hours, due to lack of staff, the coordinator asked me if I could stay a few more moments to give admission to a small contingent of refugees that had just arrived. Obviously for me, there was a good opportunity to look for clues by observing the new arrivals. The new refugees had a very bad appearance. Their faces showed me a mixture of anguish and relief intertwined. Their grey-looking clothes and their forced thinness marked the pattern of desperate flight through areas of aggression. A young woman, with 3 girls on her waist, touched my sensitive heart so much that I went to get some sandwiches and found cow's milk and against the wool that opposed the humanitarian action. I thus neglected my role as a social worker, and my secret mission as an extra-temporary observer. I thought that giving a minimum of relief also calmed the anxiety that I generated myself in the face of such crude reality. The sight of hungry girls after watching how recreational drugs were traded put me very alert. Still fully aware of the non-intervention instructions, Sister Lillian would take care of allocating shelter to the refugee women, while I was taking notes holding a paper notebook on the keyboard of a primitive computer that didn't work. Those notes at hand then would be rolled into the coordinator's latest model laptop. After the woman and her 3 daughters, I took the data of a young couple with the appearance of survivors. They seemed to be good people even when a halo of physical exhaustion enveloped them. The mushroom and the shoes in bad conditions gave me the notion that they came from many journeys of march. It was Lisa and Tony who had met while escaping in the same stormy night that, in turn, helped them to stay hidden from the agents who were looking for them. Both, each in their own way, had manifested themselves in different ways against the autocratic government of their country, and each in his own way had learned with a few minutes of advantage that the secret police was following them, and with a concordant quick reaction they left what they were doing and only with the position left on foot and in bad weather in the middle of the night towards the border. It is better that I give you a lightning in the electric storm and not that you put your hands on those guys who in the name of autocracy, violate, torture and kill impunely. As I wrote, I noticed that his accounts of the brutality from which they had escaped had a certain tone of everydayness, which led me to think that I should review the historical records. I finished my turn with nothing more than 2 details. First, by order of appearance, the trafficking of high-priced recreational drugs at the same time that hamstring children and malnourished people. Secondly, from the accounts of some refugees I discovered the high chances of severe symptoms of mental illness in the leaders of the autocracy of the neighboring country. I planned to walk back to the danger, but fortunately John Bai offered me to take me in his noisy and smelly vehicle. I had grown up among quiet and clean solar electric vehicles, and those primitive motor cars that burned noisy as well as petrol were repulsive, dirty and appalling to me. When I got into his car, I felt the engine vibration and the smell of gasoline, and I realized how far they were from cleaning up the solar panels and the quiet moves. But it also reminded me that humanity is resilient, that it survives even in the darkest corners and the most obscene dirt. I myself had slept on cardboard the night before, maybe because it was mimicism didn't draw my attention. On the way, I asked John Bai about the storms in the region. That storm looked like a movie, he replied. Here the usual are days and days of rain and some storms with wind and some thunderstorms, but that electric storm of the other week struck as punishment of God. I didn't choose to ask. It was another strange illusion to me, and that I knew that the pantheons were recorded in the historical record, but I did not know which one it referred to. The talk continued as a monologue of Janbai until we reached the village of the danger. I caught the attention of his reference to the young people, no, the young people who do not study and do not work and are engaged in whole gazaneering in the corners, drugging and assaulting some unscrupulous walker. Again drugs, I thought, and I innocently asked him, do you think that drugs are becoming commonplace? And Janbai exploded in crashes with a beating jaw to the point that he almost loses control of the vehicle. I didn't expect such a good joke from you, he said, and that my European humor had surprised him. I smiled as I tried to locate the funny side of my question, unsuccessful at that moment. When I arrived in the village of El Perigo, I headed to the cafeteria where I had found Rena as an employee. I knew that she had a couple more hours left on her turn, and considering how comforting her presence for me, like the tea of wild mint with a taste of home. Except for changing the lights for the time of day and the position of the sun, I found Rena exactly the same as that same morning, and also ignored my presence when I arrived until being already settled in the bar asked me what I wanted. I looked at her with a meaningful expression and said in my simulated low voice, a tea and a consultation meeting. In a moment, gentlemen, he answered me with his perfectly accented local voice, and as if to be heard all over the place. With the same efficiency of movement he brought me a cup of tea and a paper napkin on which I noticed a scratched writing at the end of the 24. The text said, Night. Red lights in front of you. First floor. Letter A. In my tea rush, I looked for paper notes in my pocket and handed them over to him along with the written napkin. Something in her acting like she didn't know me warned me. Rena took the paper banknotes and the written napkin which she skillfully separated by placing them in a metal box that sounded like a bell when she closed it as she untied the napkin between her hands distractedly. I retreated from the place, and I went walking through what I would consider the main street of the village. As I walked and observed, I saw a trade with a sign of ferret area I found interesting. There could conceive some tungsten wire and other elements to improvise an electric stove or a heater for the tea and dry some potatoes. I entered the venue. There was only one man in the crowded shelves that made the room small. I was treated very kindly and I bought tungsten, a few meters of cable for electricity and a minimum of sensible tools. Considering that my interactions with the temporal natives should have the least effect possible, even though no traces of survivors would be found in the observations to centuries in the future. As I walked towards my home on Matanzas Street, I saw that people were throwing into the garbage a lot of materials and items that were still in a condition to be recycled. I even picked up an old TV and before dawn I was already watching the news in white and black and eating some roasted potatoes with green peppers and taking a cup of a well-boiled but somewhat insulting tea. I thought I should ask Rena where he got the wild mint, or I would look through the fields. At nightfall, I went out to the cafeteria, looking for the white door next to the local that had already lit its red lights. The door was not secured and I entered naturally. After placing a narrow and dirty grey cement staircase, I was filled with a door with a black letter A painted in major. I knocked with the nodules. I heard Rena's voice asking the conscript, "Who is it?" I answered him in language of the 24, what the locals would have confused with laundry or washing or with some reference to maternal sexual morals according to the language of whom he heard. I heard the mechanical lock rotating and the running of a passenger. In the Rena department, the air was dense and sweetly aromatized, the walls covered with worn painted paper, with petal patterns. The ceiling was low, and indirect light was reflected in the curtains of fit, and on the clean floor of worn wood. In one corner, a small electric stove whispered gently, providing the heat needed to fight the outside cold, and that of the soul. The tungsten shone tenderly, as if it also kept its own secrets. Rena instructed me to sit on the discolored pearl sofa that sank under my weight, or the weight of her years. Used cushions, with embroidery from other times, were mounted in a corner. A low wooden table, with marks of cups and ashes, was the epicenter of our clandestine encounter. At a glance, an old TV flashes and the news unfolds on the screen. Rena let it run, saying that it was irrelevant to us, but that it would prevent the walls from hearing. Rena, light of clothes by the inner heat, looked out the window and sat on the couch next to me. The cup of tea of wild mint rested in his hands, and another in mine, the steam ascending like the sighs of the ages. His look, deep and enigmatic, seems to pass through me like a prey bird. Now if, Vigilante, said Rena looking me in the eyes, we have to keep paying attention. This morning and afternoon there were agents that could ruin our mission. Some are part of what they call Secret Service, or security forces, and others belong to drug trafficking gangs and other illegal trade. Apparently all or almost all are involved in earning profits from the same business. When I arrived a month ago, he continued, they immediately started monitoring me permanently, and they are doing the same thing now with you, suspecting of the rival corporations. How did you find out all that? I asked her while she kept speaking fast and low. The first thing they did when I started looking for accommodation, they asked me about my job. I told them I came to introduce myself as administrative staff at the local hospital. And so I managed to get this little apartment rented. But despite having all my documents on this in order, the director of the hospital told me that it would take between 2 and 3 months for my work activation. Then I discovered that he uses those delays to harness profits for his own benefit, which is irrelevant to our mission. But you lose access to first-hand data from the hospital, I said, something worried. Could you make remote access to the hospital computer system? I asked him a stupid question that didn't require an answer. Yet he answered me enthusiastically. Yes, and it was lucky, because I managed to interfere with all communications using the computer programs of the stealth interface of Mental and access all the communications in real time or delayed without leaving a record. It's almost like monitoring the zombies with drones and screens while we drink a cup of tea. He said and typed on the built-in system over his scar. The screen of the old TV blinked and began to show images of different security cameras. She said and clarified, no zombies. Still.